All right, welcome folks to the Neurosurgery Journey. My name's Kyle. I'm going to be your host today. And today we're going to be talking about MD versus PhD versus MDPhD. It's not a fight, it's not a debate. What it is we're going to be talking about what are the differences, how do you get to be each one, what does each one do, and what opportunities will getting each degree open up for you. I think it's going to be a great conversation. We have a great couple of guests today. So April, Nikki, how are we doing today?
Doing great.
Awesome. Also, I'm over here. I'm just getting over a sickness. So if my voice sounds a little rough, that explains that. They finally got my AC turned on in my apartment today. So that's why I was able to wear, the old Patagonia. I'm getting used to summers in the Northeast. April and I are from Louisiana, so it should be 101 degrees right now, but it's only 70 degrees outside.
Yeah, I'm back in Louisiana right now visiting some family, and it's 85 degrees and extremely humid.
That's the best. Like I this time of year is like outside frisbee time, lemonade. Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of the 60-degree weather.
Yeah, but, I'm from California. We're used to the dry heat. So I'm in Chicago now, and probably not as bad as Louisiana, but the humidity kills me. I would take 110-degree heat any day over like 80 and humid.
I could not agree more. Where in California?
Sacramento area. So the real hot, the valley part of the state.
Wow. Okay. So what am I complaining about? You went from Sacramento to Chicago.
Yeah.
Because at least it gets hot in New York City. Like Chicago, I've been to Chicago one time. It was September 5th, and I had to put on a coat. Like I remember that distinctly. It was a shocking experience.
Yeah, honestly, the cold is not as hard to adapt to as I thought it would be. The kind of lack of sunshine in the winter is honestly way worse for me than the actual snow.
I completely agree. I was just telling Kyle that last winter in New Haven was not that bad, but it was super gloomy. The sun goes down at 4 p.m. and we didn't have a lot of snow. So I couldn't even enjoy the beauty of the snow, but I had all the negative climate conditions. So it was just a terrible winter.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, I guess I'll stop with my trauma dumping on my lackluster winter. But to get started, I think let's introduce ourselves. Like, give us a background on where we each stand, because we're each representing one of the degree pathways that we'll be talking about today. I guess I'll go ahead and start. So, I am a third-year medical student trying to get my MD. I'm also getting a master's, but for now, let's just say for the conversation, MD. And I originally went to the University of Louisiana, go Cajuns, for my chemical engineering degree, graduated, and now I'm at Cornell, and I'm my third year, and I want to go into neurosurgery. All right. Nikki, you want to bridge the gap?
Yeah, sure. My name's Nikki. I originally did my undergraduate degree at UC Santa Barbara. So as I mentioned, I'm from California, and I did a master's degree at UC Davis before moving out to Chicago, originally just for an MD program. But at my school, we have the option to switch into what's called the Track 2 MD-PhD program after our second year. But I guess I was not totally sold on the research life yet, because I actually did 3 years of med school first before I entered into the PhD. So a little bit non-traditional compared to some other MD-PhD programs. And I am now in the fourth year of my PhD and very much looking forward to pretty soon here. Unfortunately, not soon enough, but getting back to the clinical world after many years in the lab at this point.
Gotcha. Okay, very interesting. All right, April, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure. So I am a third-year PhD student in neuroscience. I also got my bachelor's degree from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Go Cajuns. I got a biology degree, and I went straight from undergrad into a PhD program at Yale University. It's been a great time. I mean, I started grad school in the pandemic, like in the middle of COVID, August 2020, which was an insane time. It was isolating, pretty strange to adapt to taking all my classes online and like having to be trained on like microscopes and in different techniques all over Zoom or like through FaceTime. So that was pretty odd, but I mean, so far the research is great, and I really enjoy my program. And the PhD life is it's an interesting one. It's a pretty freeing journey. I have a lot of freedom. People always say, you know, you work 14-hour days, but you can choose which 14 hours you work. And I feel like that's very true.
Okay, awesome. So we got 2 Cajuns on the podcast. We are getting demonetized for sure. Okay, so now we know where everybody's coming from, you know, what our trajectories are, but let's talk about what made you decide this path. Were you originally thinking something else, or, you know, were you considering another degree pathway? You know, what really got you on this pathway? Anybody can start.
I don't mind starting. I guess, like I mentioned, I was originally only intending to do an MD program. I kind of had toyed with the idea of an MD PhD, but had done some computational neuroscience research in undergrad, and it was interesting, but it was really not my thing. And with what I do now is much more wet lab bench research based, and I like that a lot more. So I was thinking wasn't really interested in the PhD world really, and that my passion was really in the clinical world, and I liked working with patients and things like that from experiences as a medical assistant and whatnot before going to medical school. So it really was, I did actually, after that 3rd year of med school, I did a research year at the University of Illinois. And originally I thought I was just going to do that because, like Kyle, I wanted and still do intend to become a neurosurgeon. So the idea was to do research in the Department of Neurosurgery there. And kind of, I was thinking originally it would be more clinical research in hopes of, you know, the idea is often to crank out as many papers as possible, get as much exposure to clinical research as possible in 1 year. And I did do a fair amount of that, but my PI there really encouraged me to get involved in some animal research. We had a rat model of spinal cord injury and traumatic brain injury. And so I really learned a lot of things, kind of in a lot of ways teaching myself in that lab, because it was a lot of neurosurgery residents, but we didn't really have any like postdocs or other grad students or anybody else who actually like knew how to do anything. So it was a lot of like teaching myself, which I know a lot of PhD students also have to do many times in their labs. And I found that I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the kind of troubleshooting aspect of experiments. And that's kind of what made me decide to apply for our like track 2 program at my school, where I could then switch into a PhD. And I've kind of stuck in a similar vein of research with doing the traumatic brain injury stuff, but I've switched now to mouse models, so a little bit smaller, and further developed my bench skills in the process. But it was really that experience during the research year that kind of sold me on the bench research, because prior to that had been largely computational, and I didn't think I liked it, but it turned out that I did.
Yeah. Were you ever considering like a PhD before you actually got in the lab, like in undergrad or any time else?
Not really, honestly, because it was my freshman year of college when I first started shadowing a physician. So I was pretty sold on the MD route from the beginning. I just wasn't sure how much I wanted to incorporate research and what type of research until that kind of evolved through the course of my, you know, med school experiences.
Gotcha. Awesome. April?
So my path is kind of the opposite of Nikki's. So I started doing undergraduate research my first semester of my freshman year of college. And I started as a biology major. I also finished as a biology major, but I went in and I was thinking that I was going to go the MD route, as a lot of biology majors go into college and think I'm going to go to med school.
Yeah.
But I started actually doing phytoplankton ecology research, which is not related to biomedical science pretty much at all. um, the University of Louisiana at Lafayette has an extremely strong ecology, evolutionary biology department. So a lot of my initial research was done in ecology. And then this summer, after my first year, I did a summer undergraduate research experience through the Louisiana Biomedical Research Network. And I actually started working in an epilepsy lab at LSU Shreveport. And that was super cool. This was like my first introduction to neuroscience,
Yeah.
my first introduction to animal research, and I was looking at kind of the connections between epilepsy and autism spectrum disorder. And this was such a fun experience. I really loved the PI. I loved the lab mates. I really enjoyed the whole environment of the lab. And I distinctly remember towards the end of the summer, my PI was like, April, you're really good at this. You should consider research as like a career option. And I was like, thank you, Dr. So-and-so, but I'm good. I'm just doing this so that I can get a good resume for med school. That was my plan. And so when I got back to UL, I still worked in the phytoplankton ecology lab, but for fewer hours per week. And I kind of started to transition into working in a different neuroscience lab because I basically caught the neuroscience bug just from that first summer. And so I ended up working in the neuroscience lab for the next 3 years for the remainder of my undergraduate career. And that was really cool, working on projects really surrounding like cerebellar ataxia. So still very clinically focused, but very much basic science research. And I continued to do different summer research programs. So at this point, I like to research, but I still thought that I was going to like just do it so that I can get into med school. So yeah, the summer after my sophomore year, I did an MD-PhD summer program at UC San Diego, and I really enjoyed that as well. I was actually doing cardiology research there, and I was shadowing a transplant cardiologist, and that was really fun. It was interesting to see like even the time management aspect of like someone who is extremely busy and is like actively doing surgeries and like checking in post-op and all that, and then who is also like partially running a lab. Like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? And I liked the vibe of that, but I was still like unsure. Like, do I really want to do this? It seems like a lot. I don't know if I really want to like have to work with patients all day, every day. And so the third summer, I did a research program at Stanford. I was also working in autism research. And that kind of sealed the deal for me. I was like, I really, really love this field. I really love the questions that are being asked about neurodevelopment. That was an interesting summer because my project really was failing all summer long. And I was like, wow, this is really what it's like to be a grad student. I love this. And I was like, wow, pain and failure. I mean, what more could I want out of my life?
Yeah.
So after that summer is really when I decided to apply to grad school. And yeah, since I had done a lot of neuroscience research, and again, I just really enjoyed thinking about scientific questions. I think that's really what caught me, like the process of thinking through the mechanisms of diseases and how I can answer those questions. And I don't know, I think that my brain has just always been very curious, and so that curiosity has led me to ask more and more questions. And like I enjoy reading papers and seeing how the little increments of discoveries that we make are all kind of summing up to push the field forward. And I really appreciate those types of just like thought processes. And so, yeah, a lot of what I do is just thinking, and I enjoy doing that. And then doing experiments that often fail, but when they do work, it's like, wow, I'm having a great day. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into research. Just it's a pretty convoluted path of like starting with MD, figuring out if I wanted to do MD PhD, and then landing on PhD. And I'm happy with my choices.
Okay, so you really went the full MD, PhD kind of route.
I did.
Wow.
It took a lot of thought, and I think every experience that I had really contributed to how I ended up at my decision. Because I was
Mhm.
just doing, I I started in seriously basic science, like nothing to do with clinical
Yeah,
aspects, and then moved into basic science that was more translational, and then tried doing the like shadowing and working in the lab, which was very that was a life-changing experience to get both of those at the
yeah,
same time.
yeah.
And then further just like doing more deeper research into like the autism field really sealed the deal for me.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's such a theme. Is like, because we've all done things to, like for the sake of getting into med school, like that I did not want to do by any means. But so many of the things that I did for that reason, I end up liking, like, like you were saying, you did it for med school, but then that thing happened to also be your passion you found out. So a lot of
Absolutely.
times those opportunities really pay off by giving you that clarity.
Definitely. I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in research or interested in medicine, just try out every opportunity. Like try out doing undergraduate research, try out shadowing, try out being a medical assistant or a scribe. Like try out all these different things because sometimes you figure out, wow, I really love this. I'm really passionate about this. This is something I want to pursue. And other times you figure out, wow, I really hate this, and I'm glad I didn't spend 5 years of my life doing this,
Yeah.
because you know that your time is precious, and the earlier you can figure out what you like and what you don't like, it saves you time, money, energy, peace of mind.
Yeah, and those are the good realizations when you find something you don't want to do. Because I don't know, for me, like some of the angst is when you find a lot of things that you like, and then you
Hmm.
have to like, decide between how you want your life to go. But once you find something you don't want to do, at least you can just get it away from you. And so I realize I don't like this. I don't have to worry myself into thinking that I need to, prepare for this. But so my path is way more simple. So like easy. I started undergrad and I started in engineering, and I was kind of toying between going into becoming an engineer or a doctor, but I think I was pretty set on being a doctor from 6 months in. I always wanted to involve engineering within like my medical journey, but I wanted medicine to be the focus. And I shadowed doctors. I watched different specialties and stuff, and I pretty much kind of just rolled into medical school without doing a whole lot of forethought on whether MD, PhD, or PhD would be suitable options too. Because I saw MD, PhD, and I was thinking like, okay, so I can do both, but then it's 8 years long, and I'm ready right now. I'm ready to go. Like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Which as maturing, I've realized it's taking time is sometimes probably a lot better. And I really never considered PhD. But I have a lot of people in my family who went the PhD route. Like my brother is also getting a PhD. So I'm kind of seeing the highs and lows of the PhD program also, comparing and contrasting to what I'm going through. But yeah, like I said, my journey is pretty clear. I not a lot of interesting stuff to it. But okay, so now we figured out, what led you to this and, your decisions. But how do you get into this field? Like, is there standardized tests? Does GPA count? Extracurriculars, research? Like, what are the considerations when deciding between any of these fields?
I can start here. For the PhD, as far as standardized tests go, The GRE is the standardized test to enter a PhD program. However, a lot of schools are moving away from the GRE, which I think is a very positive decision, because with the GRE and pretty much any standardized test, it really depends on your socioeconomic status and your opportunities, the amount of money that you have to take the classes to prepare for it and to buy the materials. And the GRE does not actually tell you whether you're going to be a good graduate student. It doesn't tell you whether you're going to be a good scientist. It tells you that you know a lot of vocabulary and that you can do middle school math. So it it doesn't really give a lot of information that can predict the success of a student in graduate school and later on in their scientific journey. So I'm very excited that a lot of schools are moving away from the GRE, but I know programs are still holding on to it. So it's just program dependent if you will actually have to take the GRE. I took it, and when I was applying, a lot of the schools said it was optional. So I just chose not to submit it because I was like, if they are not asking for it, I'm not going to submit it. So the GRE is one thing. At least for science PhDs, what's really important is actually your research experience over the grades that you have. So if you have research experience and you've done meaningful work, then that is going to count more than if you have maintained a 4.0 your entire collegiate experience. What also really matters is your letters of reference from different professors, or if you worked in industry, from your supervisors. That really takes into a major account for admissions. The admissions committee typically wants to see that, one, you are able to have original scientific thoughts and you can understand how the scientific process works. Two, that you can work well in a lab and with other people, and that you can function in a collaborative environment. And three, that you have like a self-driven passion for something. A PhD is fully a self-directed project. It's a self-directed degree. And so you have to have the initiative to wake up every day and go into the lab and do as much work as you want to do. Your PhD is only going to progress as fast as you want it to progress. So in order to be successful, you really should have like the drive to, look at another paper to understand the literature better. Go in and spend 8 hours in a basement imaging. I've done that many times. You have to,
big fun.
Yeah, it's great. It's incredible. Everyone do a PhD. But yeah, you really have to have like a self-driving passion, and the ability to know that like a PhD is truly a marathon, and you make a lot of mistakes and you make a lot of like failed experiments. But you have to keep going and you have to keep motivating yourself to keep going. It's really not a sprint. No one is telling you that you need to like do everything in 3 years, 4 years. Oftentimes PhDs take 5, 6, sometimes 7 years. So it's really, you're in it for the long haul. So you have to have that, like, again, just like self-determination to keep going. So I think those are the major like characteristics that you need to showcase in an application. So yeah, your like willingness to do research, good letters of recommendation, and yeah, your previous research experience are the most important things, rather than like grades and the GRE scores. It's important to have good grades, but also you could not have like fantastic, perfect grades and still get into a great PhD program.
Awesome. And yeah, the GRE thing is so weird because, like, if I'm not mistaken, like every grad school, like every area takes a GRE, and it's the exact same test too. Like the GRE, if you're going to neuroscience, is going to be the same if you're going into speech pathology, if you're going into petroleum engineering.
That's correct, and that's yeah. The GRE is so messed up, and it's truly just a terrible exam. It's very expensive. It is testing if you know how to take a test. which
Mhm.
I mean is a skill, I guess, but like not a useful skill. um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm glad that a lot of schools have realized kind of the underlying factors that maybe make some groups worse at taking the GRE. I mean, it's just it's a horrible exam, and I'm glad people are moving away from using it.
Yeah. Well, I think the medical community is also kind of waking up to that because, like we have 3 board exams. Our step 1 exam is now officially pass fail. So you have to pass it, but it's not like a graded scale where it's, like person who got this score is going to be this much better of a doctor than somebody got this score. And eventually our second board exam is also going to be pass fail too. So I'm glad that philosophy is kind of echoing across the scientific community a bit.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but I guess I'll cover for the MD part, Nikki, and then you can fill us in if there's any like things that we're missing if you're applying to a MD PhD program.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for an MD, let's see. So I would say like the research is important, but it's definitely not the focus like it is in a PhD application program. It seems like it's good to have it. It's good to show that you can do research because there is research to medicine, but it's not the focus of what you do every day. But more importantly, the things that they look for is GPA. You need to maintain a high GPA and a high MCAT score. So an MCAT is a standardized test like the GRE, but it's going to be the only people who take it are people who are going into schools that make you a physician. So MD schools and DO schools, you have to take the MCAT. And it's a long, brutal test. It's very difficult. I've taken my first and second medical board exams, and I have to say I think my MCAT experience is worse than that. It's just a long test, and it's weird, but you got to do it. And then also extracurriculars like volunteering are important. Medical experience, whether it's in clinical environments or just shadowing in a hospital is also very important. But it's a lot of different things, with GPA and MCAT still being the most important aspects when applying. So that's the MD side. Nikki, is there anything, I know you went into an MD program, but for those either thinking about going path 1 or path 2 for the MD PhD, is there any extra considerations they need to think about?
I will say, I definitely, as far as the MCAT is concerned and the GRE, I agree with April on that is often much more of a reflection of socioeconomic status than anything else. And I think med schools are starting to go a little bit more holistic with how they're, evaluating applicants, but I don't know if they're actually considering dropping the MCAT, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of the reality we have to contend with. And even I did a master's in public health before I started this program, and they required the GRE. So to your point about what is that really saying about public health versus neuroscience, how do you have the same admissions test for those two programs? They're wildly different. So completely agree.
Poetry.
Yeah, exactly. What does that even say about you, really, other than that you can take a test? So completely agree on the standardized test stuff. I think if you're applying outright for an MD PhD program, meaning from the beginning that you're going to do both the MD and the PhD, usually they just look at the MCAT and they don't require you to submit the GRE. As from what I remember when I looked into this briefly before I applied for med school. As far as if you're kind of doing a track 2 or switching into a program, for me, the most important thing, and April alluded to this already, was the research experience. Because really at least in our program, the first year PhD students rotate through labs. They do 3 or 4 lab rotations, and then they kind of get to pick a lab. If you're an MD PhD, you're kind of starting right off the bat in the lab that you're going to do your PhD in. And maybe you've done, previous, your M1 summer, you've done research with that person, for example, but we just don't have as much opportunity to rotate through different labs. So I think what sort of made me competitive and what made my PI interested in me was having that experience during the research year and having a lot of experience with rodent handling and rodent surgery and various things that we were already doing and that she was already doing in her lab. So she knew that she wasn't going to have to sink as much time into training me.
Yeah.
So the previous research experience helps a lot, regardless of whether you're going to do kind of like a track 1 or track 2 MD PhD. And something I can't speak to, but I just wanted to acknowledge is that some MD PhD programs are kind of like internally funded by the university, and others are MSTP programs, which is medical scientist training program.
Yeah.
There's also a residency equivalent that's PSTP. That's why I hesitated, because they have residency programs that are research focused that are called physician scientist training programs. But MSTP programs are funded, at least in part, by the NIH. So the stipends that the students get while they're participating in that program are funded by the NIH. So those are slightly different types of programs. So mine is not an MSTP, so I can't really speak to that. I don't know, April, maybe at your school you know a little bit more about those programs than I do, but I just wanted to mention that for anybody that's like considering applying.
Yeah.
PhD.
I did not even know about that.
Yeah, I can chat a little bit about it. The newer program that I did at UC San Diego was an MSTP training program. So it was also, actually, that one was funded by the National Heart Blood Lung Association, and I think also partly by the NIH. But at Yale, we do have an MSTP program, and for that program, the students do 2 years of their MD, and then they switch into 4 plus years of PhD, and then finish the last 2 years of MD. Actually, one of my lab mates is in the MSTP program. It is fully funded by NIH, and they get a stipend that is similar to a PhD stipend. So my lab mate does not have to pay for medical school and is getting paid to be an MSTP.
Wow.
And it's nice that you're getting paid and you won't have any med school bills afterwards.
Yeah.
And so that's a positive, but it is I think at our school they do rotations during that first summer, either before starting med school or the summer right after they've started med school. So I think they do a summer rotation, and then they similarly have to almost choose a lab immediately. So it is less opportunity to rotate, but it is a pretty cool program. I'm involved with their summer mentorship program, which is similar. Students get to shadow doctors at our local clinic, and then they do lab work during the day.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that there was that distinction.
Yeah.
Is there anything you should consider when choosing between them? Is that something you know ahead of time?
Usually, yeah. So the program will definitely kind of advertise that if they're an MSTP program. For me, at least at my school, financially speaking, it didn't really make a difference because they still provide us with a tuition waiver and a stipend that is the same as what the regular PhD students get. So the funding is just internal. So, but I did have to, because they don't currently accept track 1 applicants at my school, I did have to pay for the first few years of med school because the tuition waiver and stuff kicked in once I was officially in the MD PhD. So if you were gonna consider doing what I did and do a track 2, keep in mind that you would potentially be paying for or going into debt for some amount of med school. So I think that's definitely, the considerations are largely financial and potentially prestige, because I do think that MSTP programs are considered to be kind of more prestigious than just a regular old MD PhD, which sounds ridiculous as I'm saying it, but that kind of thing does matter in some cases. We all know that for postdoctoral positions or residency positions, at the end of the day, they do often, to a degree, care about what kind of a school you went to. So that is something to consider depending on what your future goals are. That being said, I think that those kind of things, in my case, neurosurgery is achievable even if you don't go to the top, the number 1 university in the world. So, but just something to keep in mind.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so, okay, so now we talked about how you decided and how you got there. Let's talk about, like, what does your day-to-day look like in your program right now? Like, I know when I was an undergrad, I kind of thought med students had like a desk in the hospital, and then they go care for their patients, and then they went back to studying, and then they took the test. I don't know. I don't know what I thought. But yeah, why don't you just give us, a look at, like, what are you doing at your programs right now?
Imaging for 8 hours in the basement, I think.
Oh my God.
I mean, like, honestly, that example is like pretty spot on. I think, so April and I may have pretty similar answers in that regard, because I'm in the, latter part of my PhD. So I did have classes that I had to take that were neuroscience specific in the beginning. But that has kind of tapered off to, we have like a required seminar series and a required journal club.
Okay.
It'll happen a couple times a month. But other than that, I'm pretty much in lab all the time. And my schedule is, you have to be very self-motivated, as April already said. So it's kind of dependent on what's going on with your experiments. I do like meet with my PI every week. So and sometimes you meet with other PIs or other students as part of collaborative projects, et cetera. But it's mostly just being in the lab, or genuinely like spending 8 hours at a microscope in the dark, which kind of screws with your sleep cycles a little bit. Or in my case, because I also do a lot of imaging, I've been working on a single cell RNA sequencing project. So that's been a lot of like trial and error and kind of teaching myself how to do it, because nobody in my lab uses that technique. So I really had to kind of like just be in the lab practicing how to prepare those samples on mouse brains in my case. So it's really just a lot of being in lab, a lot of failing, and you just kind of hope that you fail upwards.
That's a great way to put that. Fail upwards.
I completely agree with everything. That is the best line that I've heard, failing upwards. Actually, I think the best line that I've heard about failing is that fail just means first attempt in learning. And I've kept that with me the whole, like, my entire time that I've been in grad school, because I'm like, wow, I'm learning. We're trainees. That's what we are.
Wow.
We're trainees. And this was just my first attempt in learning. But I completely agree. My day-to-day is dependent on what experiments that I'm doing, and it actually just I have a lot of meetings. I have a lot of meetings, which is unfortunate because I meet so much that I'm like, when am I supposed to get these experiments done? Because I'm co-advised, so I have 2 PIs. So that means like 2 lab meetings per week. I meet with my primary advisor every week, and then I meet with my co-advisor and my primary advisor together every other week. And then we have small team meetings because our labs are like collaborating with each other, and we have some people are working on the autism project, some people are working on a schizophrenia project. It's a lot of different projects, so we have small team meetings, and then we have a different joint lab meeting where it's like a more clinical based. Anyway, so I have a lot of meetings.
Wow.
Just like throughout the week. So that's a majority of my time. During my first 2 years, I was taking classes, as was mentioned, and so just balancing classes and lab time. As part of our requirements, we have to serve as teaching assistants. So last semester, I was a TA for an undergraduate course, and then I'm TAing again next semester. So that's just like twice a week for an hour, but then I like spend time grading their assignments and giving feedback and stuff. But yeah, the rest of my time is just doing experiments, and it really just depends on what I'm doing. So I actually also recently as in last month, submitted samples for single cell RNA sequencing. And so I just got those results back. So now I'm going to be doing more computational analyses of that. But I'm still doing wet lab stuff too, because the project has to move forward. So Yeah, it's just wet lab experiments, computational analyses, data analysis. It's just you do something different every day, but what I can always count on is the meetings. Can always count on the meetings.
Yeah, you gotta. So you have a advisor, co-advisor, assistant to the co-advisor.
Yeah.
Scheduling things is always just a mess. It's always a mess.
Yeah. And there's
Wow.
always the April, I'm sure you've experienced this too. Anytime you have like a new student or new lab tech, new anybody in the lab, often you're involved in training them as
Yes.
well. So that ends up taking up some time, or if you have a rotating student for the summer or something like that needs
Absolutely.
supervision. So teaching becomes a lot of what you do as well.
Yes, we have undergrads that work in our lab, and I have one that works with me during the school year, and so I've had to teach her a lot of stuff. And then she's leaving for the summer, so I have a different student coming in for the summer that I'm going to have to retrain on everything. So it's definitely a good way for me to like stay up on my knowledge of the subject that I'm teaching, because my students will ask me questions, and I'm like, okay, let me get back to you on that. So it keeps me on my toes. I do really enjoy training new like undergrads or rotating students. It's fun to like go through like what is a PCR and how do you pipette stuff. And then also like teach them like, okay, these are brain dissections and this is how you like get good RNA from a sample that is very small. So it's fun to train people.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I think so in terms of just the strict like MD, when I was hearing you say it's not a marathon, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I feel like that med school is the opposite. Like it is a sprint. It is like you have very clear goals. Like it's not as much self-determined goals. It's like you have to do this and it has to be done 5 minutes ago. Like because our first preclinical years, which is preclinicals just means like the years you're just learning the theory. You're learning the pathophysiology, you're learning the anatomy, and that's a lot of testing. So at Cornell, we have a test every week. Every Friday, we would take a test on everything we learned, anatomy, neurology, like everything would be at the end. And then in clinicals, like the speed just kicks into more because not only are you studying for standardized tests at the end of every month, you also have clinical responsibilities in the hospital anywhere from 8 to 12 to sometimes 24 hours a day, depending on your rotation. So it's like, never did I feel like in medical school, like the issue is a concept is so hard I cannot comprehend it. Like in undergrad, in engineering and like in my like neuroscience classes, I remember just like the limiting factor not being there's an overabundance of information. It was very complicated. In med school, it's not that it's necessarily hard material that you have to like understand. It's just there's like so much of it. When you're in the hospital, you have some of these fellows have like 40 patients on their list they have to keep up with. Like it's just so much volume that you have to think quickly. So that's really like the day-to-day is you have to get a lot of things done. Right now, I'm in my research period, which is really nice, and I'm really enjoying that. So in med school, you do research, especially if you want to go into neurosurgery. Sometimes, you sometimes can do wet lab research or clinical research, which is like looking at clinical data and then writing papers off of that. But research is certainly not the focus of medical school. It's in some specialties, they really don't care if you have research or not. Neurosurgery is a little different because like research is so important. Like the average amount of publications that people have when applying into neurosurgery is like 6 to 8 in-print manuscripts and like anywhere from like 25 abstracts and presentations and stuff. So it's important. It's not the focus. And then after the clinical year, it's kind of you start doing away rotations and you apply for residency. So I guess I'll also talk a little bit about residency. So after you're done with med school, when you're a medical student, you're not like I've had people ask me, so what are you majoring in medical school? You know, it's like, you know, and if you don't know, like, yeah, it's a good question. Like, yeah, you know, you go to med school and, hey, you know, my cousin's an OB-GYN now, you know? But what you do is when you're in medical school, you are focused on being a general, like, physician. You will graduate being a MD or DO doctor. But you're not differentiated into your specialty until you enter into a residency. So a residency is like when you are actually working to become, so in Nikki and I's case, neurosurgery. So we would apply to a neurosurgery residency. April, is there like a residency equivalent in the grad school world? Like, is there anything after grad school before you become
Yes.
a full?
Yeah, so in the grad school world, we have postdocs, and this is just after you've gotten your PhD, you do more training. You just keep on training.
Yeah.
And so typically, a postdoc just means it's after your doctoral degree, and you can choose kind of whatever you want to do again. So my PhD is going to be in neuroscience. My postdoc, if I wanted to, like I could transition to a different field of study. Like if I wanted to kind of do like neuroendocrinology, neuroimmunology, then maybe I would move into a lab whose specialty is like, I mean, maybe I would go to an endocrinology lab and then take the skills that I've learned from my neuroscience training, and apply them to like this endocrinology lab. And then I can, you know, then enter the field of neuroendocrinology. So, or I
Oh,
could just stay doing like straight autism stuff, and continue on doing exactly the same kind of work that I'm doing, just like in a different setting, maybe asking a new question. The postdoc is just another training time where you can learn new skills, get further mentorship, start taking a more independent role. So I mentioned that the PhD is very self-driven, very self-directed, but you're still kind of like a baby scientist at this point. Like people expect you to like get a publication by the end of your 6 years. Um, but then once you're a postdoc, you are like, we are cutting you off. You are an independent scientist. Like you should know how to do a bunch of stuff and like fully lead a project and maybe lead a sub team. Basically, in a lab setting, the postdocs are like the senior members of the lab. The grad students are like the intermediate members of the lab. And then if you have like a lab tech or an undergraduate, they are like the newest members in the lab, and they need a lot of like hands-on training that the postdocs will probably be the people to train them. So once you're at postdoc level, you are basically in preparation to run your own lab, or in preparation to like go into industry if you wanted to. You could go into industry directly out of your PhD. That's also an option. But if you're a postdoc and you want to continue into being a professor in academia, that is the training ground for like kind of learning lab management, and really, you should be like publishing 1 to 2 or 3 papers. Postdocs can range from like 2 years to like 5 to 7 years. So you're supposed to be like extremely productive in an extremely short amount of time and produce a lot of work, because you already have all the skills that you've learned from your PhD. So that's the kind of the residency equivalent.
okay, interesting. I did not know you could switch into a whole different like area of study like that. That's it. That's cool. So I guess this actually leads to a good segue. All right, so we've done the school, we've done the post-school training, and now congratulations, your final form. What does the career in our fields look like? So I guess I'll start with MD. So when you graduate with when you finish your degree and you finish your residency training, you are an attending physician. Sometimes you can do a fellowship, which there's actually even more training you can do. So if you want to go into neurosurgery, you can also do a fellowship in like pediatric neurosurgery or in like endovascular, cerebrovascular neurosurgery or spine. So you can subspecialize into this field of neurosurgery to get more training and experience in that area. But once you become an attending, you're officially a doctor. You're not a doctor. You're officially a practicing neurosurgeon. So you can either work in an academic setting with like a university, you can work in private practice, or you could work in like a hybrid between those two, or you can work with a hospital. And that's going to be on your preferences, on how much you want to integrate research. But if you're an MD or DO without a PhD, you still can do research. Most of my PIs who do academically led careers have only an MD. It's just, I think that's because practicing doctors do not have a PhD. But I think a PhD does offer a physician a whole lot of skills and opportunities that have it without having it to begin with. So Nikki, you want to tell us what a PhD could add to an MD's career?
Yeah, I think the reason why it was so important to me, I mean, I do hope to eventually work in, an academic neurosurgery setting, hopefully with kind of the resources available. And also, of course, I would need to get funding myself, to continue a kind of basic or translational research lab. But I will say, I think that it's incredibly important for MDs doing research or MD-PhDs to be able to communicate effectively with PhD scientists and vice versa, because in so many ways we kind of speak different languages, but the only way to really bring something from bench to bedside, as they say, is to be able to kind of speak the same language. And so I think that for me was the number one most important thing I wanted to get from my PhD was, how do I communicate with both MDs and PhDs in a way that we can kind of bring that research to fruition in a way that is ultimately beneficial to patients? Because I think that regardless of whether you're an MD or an MD-PhD or a PhD, that's ultimately kind of why we do this, is we want to make people's lives better in some way. And I felt that, the marriage of those two sort of training programs was the best way to do that. So that was kind of where I felt like the PhD training has really added to my knowledge, and is also, I will say there's, I have seen instances of MDs kind of shrugging off how difficult a PhD is in many ways. And having now almost, I'm not quite there, but having gone through a good chunk of it myself, my respect for PhDs is off the charts. Like, this is hands down the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. So the structure of med school really, really worked well for me. So many of us are very kind of type A in that way, and we can succeed. And it's more about getting through the volume of material, whereas a PhD is much more self-motivated, and you have to figure out a lot of things on your own and figure out kind of what you don't know and fill your knowledge gaps on your own. And there's a degree of creativity and innovation that's required that, I have a deep respect for PhDs. And so that was the other sort of component of it for me that I wasn't necessarily anticipating in the beginning, because I thought I always had respect for PhDs, and I think I did, but it's just been, 10 times more now that I'm like in my fourth year. So I think that's really my takeaways from the kind of combo career path.
Yeah, I can talk about the academic side of what a career as a principal investigator with a PhD is. And I can also just touch a little bit on industry, but I'll start with the academia side. So once you're finished your postdoc and you land a job as a principal investigator at a university, your job is to run your lab. You have to produce papers that hopefully are creative scientific discoveries that are pushing the field forward. But the day-to-day of a PI is also a lot of meetings. I will say my primary advisor, she's an MD PhD, and she is in meetings all the time, like all day. She is in meetings. I'm like, Ellen, are you good?
Yeah.
But yeah, so you have to run your lab. You basically are running a business whenever you're running your lab because one, you have to find funding. And so you need money to do research. I have been quoted by my father as saying research ain't cheap, which it's not. It's really not cheap. So you have to find funding. So that means you're writing grants. You are grant writing for a majority of the time. We are asking taxpayers to give us money to do work that we think is important that will help the taxpayers. So we apply to funding from the NIH, the National Science Foundation, and also private funders. That could be like Autism Speaks, that could be like Safari, the Simons Foundation for Autism Research. That could be like any foundation that wants to give money for the research that you're doing, right? And so, yeah, grant writing is really important. Meeting with collaborators, advising students, advising postdocs. Let's see what else. It's a lot of like you're giving talks. You are like getting data from your students and postdocs, and then you're compiling all of that, and then you're giving talks at either like at your institution, at conferences. Typically, a young PI, like someone who's just gotten into the job, might still be doing bench work. They might still be running experiments. But typically, more senior PIs are never touching a pipette. Like they are not doing any experiments. Really, like the role of a PI once you're at that level is kind of to oversee all of the projects that are happening in the lab, advise on how to fix problems that arise with the projects, give feedback on the direction that the project should be going, and then just give like high level assessments and career development advice for the students that are there. And then also just like managing the finances of a lab, because like you can get a multi-million-dollar grant and then you have to pay the salaries of everyone that's in your lab, buy equipment, make sure the lab doesn't run out of money, and then try to get more money for the lab to continue to run.
You're stressing me out.
All while preparing your tenure package so that you can continue to have a job.
Oh God.
And so, yeah. Also, I forgot about this. This part is like not actually going to help your tenure package, but you're still expected to do this. One is like serving on committees for the university for free.
Yeah.
Serving on committees. Sometimes that's like the admissions committee for new students. So if you're on that committee, you have to like interview students, read their applications. Sometimes it's like DEI committees, like diversity, equity, inclusion committees. Sometimes it's random like Title IX sexual harassment committees. Like there's a bunch of committees that faculty are expected to be on that does not contribute to your tenure package. So that's something. Reviewing papers. Science runs on peer review and publication. And so another job that you don't get paid to do is review papers. Whenever you submit your paper for peer review, other scientists read it and give you comments and feedback on it. That takes a lot of time. No one is getting paid to do this. The publication industry is making a bunch of money off of labor that is free, which is wild. But it is something that you're expected to do. Yeah, and then just like being a good colleague is always very important. And so more senior PIs will often like volunteer their time to advise more junior PIs, which is great, and it's part of how science functions. But there's just like a lot of external jobs that you're expected to do, oftentimes for free. That does not contribute to your tenure package, but you're still expected to do them while running your lab and maintaining a healthy social life. So
easy, right?
Yeah,
that's what
and you don't get paid for a social life either.
That's on the academic side. In industry, I think it really depends on like what type of staff scientist you are. There's like project managers, which, you know, have more of just a managerial role. Or like you could be, after your postdoc, you could go into industry and like still be doing bench work. And a bunch of people I know have done that, and they're very happy. They work 8 to 5, and they just like do their experiments from 8 to 5. And if it doesn't get done, do it tomorrow. Like, so that, I think there's a little bit more of work-life balance, because there's like an actual schedule of time that you're supposed to be working, whereas in academia, you could work all the time if you wanted to. I often say the worst thing that they did was give me a key to the lab, because like I can be in the lab at all times, which is very tempting. So yeah, that's the life of a PI. And we voluntarily sign up for this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're not right. Like we have problems. I mean,
right? That's what I'm saying. You know, that pain and failure part that I was talking about earlier, I just thrive off of it. You know, I thrive off of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think you have to be a little bit crazy to do any of these three, but in a good way, because I think it's for the right reasons.
Absolutely.
And you know, it definitely builds resilience. That's for sure. So yeah, I think all for good reasons in the end. And I don't think, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I wouldn't change anything about what I'm doing, and I'm still glad that I'm doing it at the end of the day. And I hope that's true for y'all as well.
I completely agree. Like, there's obviously pros and cons for every like career choice. But I think like being on the academic path, it really affords me a lot of opportunities to just like have cool conversations with people who are also interested in science. And I am always intellectually stimulated, which is like the best thing for me. Like, I love asking questions. I love talking to people about their science and what they're doing and how might their ideas like influence my way of thinking. Like, I love being in an environment where everyone around me doesn't have the same thought processes as me, but we can discuss our thought processes, and we're all just like excited about cool science. And that is what drives me. I think this like career of neuroscience is really exciting, because you know the brain is an organ that is the only organ that can think about itself. You know, it's the only organ that can study itself and the world around us. And so there's so many questions that we can ask about the brain and how it works, and how like when things go wrong, how can we fix it? And so that is just like the most exciting thing, and it keeps me up at night, and it keeps me happy. And I just love being in an environment where I can talk about it at all times, and like everyone else is also excited to talk about it. So yeah, even though like grad school is hard, and like being a PI is like very hard, and there's a bunch of things that you have to do at all times, it's really fun. It's really, really fun. Like, I genuinely enjoy pipetting and like doing molecular biology.
Wow.
And like sitting at a microscope and dissecting stuff and imaging and like analyzing data, because all of it is just fun. It's like so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the pipetting part's a hot take, but I think everything else I fully agree with.
I will oftentimes be at my bench, like pipette in hand, headphones on, listening to a podcast, and just like be chatting about all the things that are happening in the world, and just like the monotony of pipetting is great.
Yeah.
It's really great.
It's very like meditative after a while.
Relaxing.
I feel the same way about like sectioning, in my case, brains.
Yes.
Like, it's very rote, and you're just kind of chilling out, listening to whatever you're listening to. Yeah, no, it's also, you know, Kyle, you can probably relate to this, like being in the operating room. I'm sure you and I have not experienced it quite to that extent because we're not trained enough yet. But when you get into that like flow state in the operating room, and it's I mean, it's a good feeling.
I would imagine that's how they feel. I'm personally sweating and like trying not to the retractor a half inch like that the whole time. But I bet it's it feels something like that. Once
Yeah, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Well, also, I think this is a great conversation. I learned a lot about MD, PhDs, and honestly, I learned about MD stuff. About time I learned about it. But yeah, and then after your career, you retire and die. So that's that's just. I feel like we need closure.
No, April and I are going to be pipetting when we're like 97.
That is so true. That's actually so true. Like I know some extremely, let me not say extremely elderly, but like pretty old PIs who are like still at it. Like one of our previous department chairs like stepped down so that he could just go back into the lab and like do experiments. He's like, I miss being at the bench, so goodbye. Like
yeah, we definitely had some have had some definitely older faculty members. The one downside is they've fallen asleep in committee meetings a couple times, like people's defenses and stuff. But otherwise, totally on it.
Elderly faculty are the best, man. They're the best.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we don't do well on vacations. Like we can vacation for a couple of days, but you got to get back, right? Like we don't do good with free time.
Yeah.
I understand where they're coming from. But
I feel like I'm not doing enough if I'm like not working on vacation.
Yeah. 100%.
I know. Then it's like you give yourself these mini goals, like, all right, coffee is going to be on at 6 today, on my vacation. But
you gotta schedule that vacation, all the activities.
Oh yeah, my itinerary. I'll hand out my PDF of my itinerary for my vacation, and it's my vacations will be very efficient.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for coming on. I think we did some good topics, and obviously, Nikki, I know you're on the show all the time because I told you last time you were on the show, you're welcome back every time, and literally 3 weeks later, I was like, can you come back on the show? So glad you came back on. Yeah, and April, obviously, if anytime you want to be on the show, let us know. Like, really good to hear your insights because we don't get to hear the PhD side. So. If you ever want to have a topic to talk about, you always have a spot. You can have an episode. So
sweet, happy to be here.
Glad you could join.
Fun.
Yeah, no, thanks. And enjoy Opelousas too. Like I'm very jealous. You get to be back in Cajun country.
It's nice being home. It's really nice being home.
Yeah, awesome. Well, all right, everybody. I hope y'all have a good night, and we'll see you next time. See you next week, Thursday at 7. All right. Bye.
Thank you.